Let me invite on the stage our good friend John Sutherland. And you're going to take us into the system of our organizations. And I'm really looking forward what comes next.
Thank you. Microphone's on. Wagner, Tannhäuser, Wolfram saying goodbye to Elizabeth, who he loves, but never managed to tell her. How's that for trauma? My belonging includes, when I come into a lovely space like this, I need to sing. It's part of what helps me settle. It's part of my soma. So if I'm not singing, you know I'm stressed. What we're going to explore now, having thought about the somatic intelligence inside us as individuals, is the same, but at the team level. And what happens, and Peter's already referred to this, is that inside every team that you're part of, there are deeply important rituals. And the main ones are to do with joining, belonging, and leaving. But actually, the whole thing starts with the founding. So inside every organization, there's a founder. And every founder has their own founding story. And every founder has usually an unconscious desire to recreate something in the family of origin that Peter was talking about earlier. Why did Steve Jobs do what he did? Partly because he was adopted. So the own founding story is a critically important part of the teams, the businesses that you ignite as a founder. And we'll think about the joining, belonging, and leaving, and one of the three core principles that turn up inside organizational life, which is to do with the principle of time, as in who came first, because people who come first take precedence over people who come later. Of exchange, which is how much do I give of myself and what do I get back in return? And am I doing my normal trick of giving so much there's nothing left of me? Or equally difficultly, am I receiving so much that there's no way I can ever repay my debt to the organization? And the last one is place. And so everyone who has been part of an organizational life in a team needs to have their place recognized. And if it's not recognized, problems begin to take place. So we're going to explore some of those themes, and I'm going to ask my wonderful Inven volunteers to come and help me by demonstrating some of the real-life examples of how these play out inside a business. So can I have my Inven volunteers? Thank you. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I need one more. Thank you. So now, what I'm going to ask to happen is I'm going to select 2 of you, and you're the first one, Martin. So come on the stage, and I'm going to, is it okay if I place my hands on your shoulders?
Yes.
Fine, thank you. If he had said no, this might have been a rather short presentation. So, your name is, okay, and I'm going to place you here. Yeah, got it. By the way, I have agreed with Inven that what we're going to do is a demonstration. We're not going to actually set up a constellation. So you can all breathe and relax. And then I need, yes, on the stage. But actually, you're over here, and you're looking that way. And in fact, you're looking that way. Now, in a moment, I'm going to place the rest of you, so please hang fire for the moment. His PhD was the founding of this particular organization, which is based in the UK. It's a clever piece of software development, which I'm not going to go into just in case you can guess what the organization actually is. So for the sake of anonymity, I'm going to leave it as software. Super intelligent, bright lad, the son of super intelligent parents who both worked all their lives in the UK Health Service doing pioneer research work. Nothing attracted to that world at all. His vision was to create a really useful piece of software that would fundamentally change the way that mobile telephony, including your smartwatch, would operate. That's his passion. Got it? Has a completely different purpose for joining this organization. And he's described as a co-founder. And this often happens in businesses, that you'll come across people described as co-founders, and occasionally it's true, and mostly it's not. So this is the founder. This is the person whose PhD postdoc work turned into a business. This is the person who was very excited by what he was doing and was very keen to join after that initial thought. But what happened was that when vision was about being of service to the world of software development, and there's a fundamental principle in systemic constellation work, which is money flows where the work is in the service of life. Money flows when the work is in the service of life. That's one to write down. For who has a wonderful active right hemisphere, his purpose was to create an organization that would be fantastic to be part of. An amazing place to be, where the values were lived and were palpable, were easy to discern. So they had slightly different, in fact fundamentally different, visions for this organization, which caused a very large problem. Now I need my next person, which is you, Victor. And so the board and the investors brought in, this is, hello, how do you do?
Thank you.
Welcome. But because of the principle of time, is joining a long time after the founding of the business and a long time after the co-founder. So how do you join from the last place? How do you arrive in a system and honor the history sufficiently to become, in fact, which was his brief, the new CEO, Geschäftsführer? That's what he was asked to do. And so the work that we did systemically was to find a way to honor contribution sufficiently so that he could have his place, his contribution to the organization, but also for the organization, for those who were loyal to him, they felt that his contribution had been properly recognized. If you don't do that and just quietly ask the person to go, stand in the corner, then the organization becomes sick because it hasn't recognized or honored a significant contribution. And you'll find the organization becomes resistant. And in fact, over time, you can find that the role that he had becomes impossible to fill because he's never left. So in working systemically and constellation-wise, we had to honor the time principle because he was here a long time before. And also we had to give his place. And therefore with honor, sir, you can now leave. And I can bring in other team members. So, up on the stage. So this is, and have worked together for a long time. And because they have a really strong working connection, and they're both from the same country, which is not the UK, we also had to make sure that their sense of strong bond didn't outshine our founder. We had to make sure that they were the right size. So I like to sell you the concept of being the right size. Because it would be quite possible when we came in to be too big, which would be to give instructions, tell people what to do, without respecting what's gone before. Look at me. It would also be possible for it to be too small and have no impact at all. So calibrating the size you need to be in an organizational system is difficult because it's dynamic. And the size you need to be today is different from the size you need to be tomorrow. I'm going to put you over here. Thank you. And finally we have representative had been here as long. And so the other thing we had to do was to make sure that our contribution was properly recognized. Now I need one more volunteer. Thank you. Perfect. I'm going to put you over here. Keep going. Keep going. Stop. This was the technology lead who was called. And the reason he's looking out that way was because when I was working with the team, he was heading out the door. And he was heading out the door because he was so fed up with the clashes between and originally, and then that he'd had enough. And so the other work we had to do was to begin to bring him round to here. So that's that business in the UK. If you think, well, I wonder what John's on about, I'd like to remind you of something about systemic constellation work. So management theory has been around for about 100 years. If you go back to where it came from, it's only about 100 years old. But as a species, we've been living in tribes and groups for at least 300,000 years, and probably longer. And so the rules of the tribe are much stronger than some book from Harvard Business Review on what you should do in terms of how to grow a team. If you don't pay attention to joining, belonging, and leaving, if you don't pay attention to how people find their place, what the exchange needs to be, and if you don't pay attention to making sure that the time principle is honored, it will show up in your organization as resistance, not resilience. And so the smart money is taking some time to dig into the somatic intelligence inside every team. Because, and here's the health warning, if you simply swap somebody out, we'll take, because maybe he's difficult. If you simply swap somebody out and put somebody else in, and you haven't paid attention to the system, of course the system replicates itself. The system's job is to bring wholeness to what's been represented, so it replicates itself. Now what I'm going to ask you wonderful people to do is to have a little mingle behind my back. So change places, please, without my instruction. Just find a new place to stand, because we're going to change team. Because the other principle I want to talk about, thank you, is the principle of belonging, which Peter spoke to a moment ago. In every team, there is usually a secret sense of belonging, something that connects each member of the team to each other. And if you can work out what it is, thank you, you can articulate something important about the business. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples. And here's the first one. So this team in Berlin, and there were exactly this number of people in the team, all had the same common feature. In their founding, in their missing father and missing mother, each one of them had become a refugee from their home country. They'd all come from different countries and ended up in Germany, in Berlin in fact. But each of them, and they'd never talked about this between them, had a sense of being removed from their place of belonging. And so what did they do? Hold on tight. Exactly. They produced a really strong bond of belonging between them, which was touching to see, but made it really challenging when they had to have confronting conversations and argue things to the ground. Because the strongest need that they had between them was to have a sense of belonging that they had missed before. And it wasn't until we spotted that it was possible to help them grow as a team. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Can we give them all a round of applause? Now, somebody's been busy painting little faces and heads on this wonderful set of representative wooden dolls. And so I also want to give you something to take away, something that you might be able to do with your own team. So here's, and is the CEO of the water business. Now what I need is a little indicator. Here we go. I asked him and his team to place themselves around each other based on two things. Firstly, how far away they were from the center of their strategic plan. And Kevin placed himself right on the strategic plan, which is classic for Kevin. He owns it. It's quite hard to budge him off to get a room to have a dialogue about it, because he's standing right on it. And then here, who is the fairly recently arrived CFO. And she placed herself about as far away as she could do from where and the center of focus for strategy was. And given that she's the CFO, that was a bit concerning. And then here's who historically had a role right next door to the CEO and saw herself as still being in that role, even though actually circumstances have changed. And in fact, she needs to be a little bit further away. And then here we have who runs the operations for a third of the business. And that's not a good color. Who runs another third. And then we have who's the CTO, a bit remote, so he was in the right place. And finally, we have who saw himself out front ahead of the strategy. That's how they placed themselves. So then we had a conversation about how that felt. Not what they thought about it, but from a gut brain, how did that feel? And what, if anything, would act as a step towards better? And this is what happened. So, recognized that she needed to be more aligned with the CFO. And the CFO recognized that she needed to begin to come in towards the team, but she had a condition. She wasn't able to do that unless she could put down the role that she was playing of acting as a sweeper-upper. She was picking up the bits that were falling off the senior team table because they weren't being picked up by other people. So I'm willing to come in, she said, but only on the condition that we all take our turn in picking up the bits of the operational plan that are falling behind. So in she came. And then recognized that actually they've been working too independently, and whilst it's just a representation, and we did this in a car park, in fact, they needed to come together. And then realized that he had perhaps misunderstood, that he shouldn't be out ahead of the CEO and should be more in service. But the biggest move came when, and watch this carefully because it's a very, very tiny move and it's quite easy to miss it. Did this. I can do it again if you like. He took one step back from the center of power for the strategy. And you could feel the relief in the team because he had now allowed some space for there to be a dialogue. And finally, in came our CTO. And now what we had was more of a sense of a team, but also, without having to get into a long discussion about it, they made a couple of fundamental changes in how they were working together. So, I have an invitation for you to consider. We don't need the camera anymore, but I do need my clock. Have a think about doing a team sculpt with your team. which is an invitation to do a different type of a somatic experience that we've just been exploring in our meditation, but with your team. And all you need is some floor space, and then you need an ability to ask people to do two things. One is, having described the strategy between you, to place some sort of marker down in a floor space to represent the strategy. And without saying too much about it, ask people to find their place relative to the strategy and relative to each other. But tell them not to talk. It's the equivalent of getting off your phone. Because what happens with all our bright PhD people is we get into our head, our anxiety arises, which is, am I going to get this wrong? But if you begin to trust your somatic intelligence, because that's what we're talking about, you will find your place. And then ask people to comment what they notice about why they've placed themselves where they are, and also what they notice around them. And when you've done that, and that takes about 20 minutes, invite them to take a step towards better. So running a somatic experience allows people just momentarily to leave behind the world of over-analyzing and begin to get into the world of somatic intelligence. And I'm here to remind you that whilst you have done your leadership training and your MBA and whatever else you've done, if you haven't begun to access all the skills you have wrapped up in your somatic intelligence, you've left a huge part of your competence out on the side. So beginning to explore this is a really powerful thing to do. Before I finish, somebody's gone for a walk. Can I have my slide back, please? Good, thank you. If you take away one thing from this conversation, I'd like you to take away the thinking behind this slide. So, like any tribe, it's very important that we pay particular attention as a ritual to joining, belonging, and leaving. So if you have somebody who's joining your organization, please pay close attention to that joining process. And if you have somebody who's leaving their organization, particularly on behalf of the person who might come into that role later on, please make sure that you properly honor their contribution and deal openly with why they're leaving, rather than sweep it under the table. What happens in teams is that we tend to sweep so much under the table, there's no longer any room to get your feet under there. And finally, think about belonging. So what is the connecting strand, the rope that connects you across your team? What is it you have in common? And you can explore that by talking about where belonging comes from for you. Thank you.